Ladies and gentlemen, there comes a moment in life when your absence speaks louder than your presence ever did. There comes a moment when you stop explaining, stop chasing, stop trying to be understood by people who were never truly listening. There comes a moment when you realize that some hearts only recognize value when it is gone, some minds only awaken when comfort is removed, and some souls only begin their journey into truth after they have lost the very person who was quietly holding their world together. You may think people understood you while you were there. You may think they saw your loyalty, your patience, your consistency, your sacrifice, your emotional depth, your wisdom, your quiet strength. But often what they see is not the soul standing before them. What they see is the service you provide. What they see is the warmth you give, the stability you bring, the peace you create, the support you offer, the way you absorb their chaos without complaint. They do not always see the person. They see the comfort, they see the convenience, they see the pattern, they see the benefit. And because you were so generous, so available, so forgiving, they mistake your grace for weakness. But life has a way of correcting illusions. One day, you are there. The next day, you are not. One day they can call on you and receive your voice. One day, they can rely on you and receive your presence. One day, they can lean on you and feel safe. One day, they can take your kindness for granted because they assume it will always return. Then suddenly the silence arrives. Suddenly the text is unanswered. Suddenly the phone is not picked up. Suddenly the chair is empty. Suddenly the space you once filled begins to echo. And in that echo something disturbing begins to happen. They begin to hear themselves. They begin to feel their own emptiness. They begin to notice the parts of themselves they had been avoiding. They begin to face the truth that your presence was not just a luxury in their life. For them, it had become a mirror, a stabilizer, even a shield. And now that mirror is gone. Now they are left with themselves. This is why absence can be so transformative. Because presence often allows people to remain unconscious. Presence allows them to delay self-reflection. Presence allows them to continue believing that their comfort is natural, that their peace is automatic, that their emotional access is guaranteed. But absence interrupts the dream. Absence breaks the spell. Absence says, now you must deal with what you ignored. And that is where change begins. Some people only grow after they lose access to the person who protected their fragility. Some only become aware after they lose the one who organized their chaos. Some only develop gratitude after the door closes. And some only understand love when love no longer stands at their side waiting to be noticed. But do not mistake this for your failure. Do not believe that because they changed after losing you, you somehow came too late or were not enough. No. Often the very reason they changed is because your departure removed the permission they had to stay emotionally asleep. While you were there, you carried the burden of the relationship, the burden of understanding, the burden of holding everything together. But when you left, the burden returned to them. And many people for the first time discover that they were not strong enough to maintain what they never truly valued. That is a painful revelation. Yet it is also an honest one. Because if someone only appreciates you when you are gone, then they were not appreciating you at all. They were appreciating the function you performed. They were appreciating the emotional security you offered. They were appreciating the way you made their life easier. But appreciation of your usefulness is not the same as recognition of your soul. And there is a profound difference between being loved and being needed. There is a profound difference between being cherished and being relied upon. There is a profound difference between being known and being convenient. Many people live their lives surrounded by others and yet remain unknown. They are praised, but not understood. They are desired, but not valued. They are contacted, but not truly loved. And when they finally withdraw, when they finally stop giving themselves away, the people around them react with confusion, with anger, with regret, sometimes with desperation. Why? Because your absence exposed their dependence. Your absence exposed their laziness. Your absence exposed their emotional immaturity. Your absence exposed the fact that they were receiving far more than they were willing to give. Now listen carefully, because this is one of life's deepest truths. When you remove yourself from people who have built their peace on your sacrifice, they will not simply miss you. They will confront themselves, and self-confrontation is unbearable for those who have spent their lives running from it. That is why some will blame you. That is why some will resent you. That is why some will call you cold, changed, proud, distant, difficult, selfish. They do this because your absence makes them feel the lack that they themselves created. They are not angry because you left. They are angry because your leaving forced them to feel what they refused to feel before. They are angry because your silence gave them no one else to silence the truth. And the truth is this: your absence did not create their emptiness. It revealed it. Your absence did not suddenly destroy their peace. It exposed how fragile their peace had always been. Your absence did not make them feel lonely. It removed the distraction that kept them from noticing their loneliness. Your absence did not cause their spiritual confusion. It forced them to stand in the confusion they had been postponing. There is a psychology to loss that most people do not understand. We imagine that people grieve only because they loved, but sometimes they grieve because they lost control. Sometimes they grieve because they lost access. Sometimes they grieve because they lost the version of themselves that existed only in relation to you. They miss the mirror you gave them. They miss the identity they borrowed from your presence. They miss the safety of being admired, forgiven, pursued, and remembered. When you leave, all of that ends. And now they must ask, who am I without the person who kept forgiving me? Who am I without the person who kept making excuses for me? Who am I without the person who kept believing in me even when I betrayed that belief? Who am I without the one who made me feel important, seen, wanted, forgiven, and secure? That question can destroy a shallow ego, but it can also awaken a soul. And that is the miracle hidden inside your absence. Sometimes the highest service you can offer another person is not endless availability. Sometimes it is the withdrawal of your energy. Sometimes it is the sacred act of stepping back and letting reality touch them. Because as long as you are always there to catch them, they never learn to stand. As long as you are always there to smooth things over, they never learn accountability. As long as you are always there to rescue, they never learn consequence. As long as you are always there to soothe, they never learn responsibility. And as long as you are always there to tolerate what should never have been tolerated, they never learn the sacred pain that produces growth. This is not cruelty. This is truth. Real transformation often begins in discomfort. Real awakening often begins in loss. Real maturity often begins when fantasy is broken. And for many people, your absence was the force that broke the fantasy. You were never meant to be a permanent bandage on their wounds. You were never meant to be a lifelong substitute for self-work. You were never meant to become a home for someone who refused to build one within themselves. You were meant to be a presence that revealed, not a presence that enabled. And once you leave, the person must finally face what they have made of their life. This is why the strongest people are often misunderstood, because their strength is not always loud. Their strength is not always dramatic. Their strength is not always obvious. Sometimes their strength is simply the decision to stop overextending themselves for people who never learned to meet them halfway. Sometimes their strength is the refusal to keep teaching the same lesson to those who keep pretending not to hear it. Sometimes their strength is the quiet dignity of walking away from what repeatedly diminishes them. And when they do walk away, others are shocked. They say, "How could you leave so suddenly?" But it was never sudden. You left after years of being ignored. You left after repeated disappointment. You left after trying to communicate and being dismissed. You left after giving chances that were never honored. You left after loving with sincerity and receiving convenience in return. You left after realizing that your empathy had become a resource people used without reverence. What looks sudden to the world is often the final chapter of a long private suffering. People only notice the departure. They do not witness the internal exhaustion that made departure necessary. That is why your absence changes them, because your leaving is not merely the loss of your body in the room, it is the loss of the emotional architecture they depended on, the loss of the person who remembered details, the loss of the one who stayed calm in storms, the loss of the one who made meaning where others made chaos, the loss of the one who kept the connection alive, even when the connection was neglected. And once that scaffolding is gone, the structure collapses enough for them to see what was unstable all along. Some will rebuild themselves. Some will finally mature. Some will finally understand what they had. Some will finally become humble. Some will finally seek therapy, prayer, introspection, accountability, or truth. Some will finally stop running from their own shadow. Some will finally stop projecting their pain onto others. Some will finally become capable of love, but others will not. Others will merely mourn the convenience, not the connection. Others will miss the access, not the essence. Others will miss your availability, not your humanity. So do not measure your worth by how loudly they reacted to your leaving. Measure your worth by the truth of what your presence required from you. Did you have to shrink to keep the peace? Did you have to silence your needs to remain accepted? Did you have to become smaller so that someone else could feel larger? Did you have to carry emotional labor that should have been shared? Did you have to translate your pain into understandable language for people who had no interest in understanding? Did you have to keep giving after your spirit had already begun to dry out? If the answer is yes, then your absence was not abandonment, it was self-respect. And self-respect is often the first language of healing. Many people imagine that healing is soft, gentle, and immediate, but true healing can begin with a sharp boundary. True healing can begin with a heartbreaking realization. True healing can begin with the decision to stop living in a role that denies your soul. When you remove yourself from a life that consumes you, even if others do not understand, your psyche begins to breathe again. You begin to remember who you were before you became useful. You begin to remember what you feel when no one is asking you to be everything for everyone. You begin to hear the voice you had muted beneath responsibility. You begin to realize that being indispensable to broken people is not the same as being cherished by healthy ones. And that realization changes everything. Because once you see the difference, you can never go back to confusion. Once you understand that being missed is not the same as being valued, you stop begging for scraps of affection and start seeking truth. Once you understand that someone can cry over losing you and still not be capable of honoring you, you stop being seduced by their tears. Once you understand that regret is not the same as repentance, you stop being manipulated by guilt. Once you understand that longing is not the same as transformation, you stop confusing emotion with evolution. The world is full of people who feel deeply after the fact. They feel regret when access is lost. They feel tenderness when the object of their neglect is gone. They feel urgency when the door is closed. They feel devotion when devotion is no longer required. But the test of character is not what someone feels after losing you. The test is what they were willing to do while they still had you. That is where the truth lives. Did they protect you while they had you? Did they honor you while they had you? Did they speak gently to you while they had you? Did they listen while they had you? Did they invest while they had you? Did they choose you consistently while they had you? Or did they assume your presence would remain no matter how little they tended it? Because neglect is often born from assumption, and assumption is one of the most dangerous diseases of the heart. People assume kindness will always return. People assume patience has no limit. People assume forgiveness is endless. People assume love is permanent regardless of behavior. People assume the person who always stayed will never leave. Then the day comes. The door closes. The silence grows. And suddenly they discover that the person they took for granted was the very foundation beneath their comfort. This is when your absence becomes their teacher. It teaches them that presence has value only when it is appreciated. It teaches them that love cannot survive without reciprocity. It teaches them that neglect has a cost. It teaches them that emotional laziness destroys connection. It teaches them that not everything precious remains available forever. It teaches them that some departures are not punishment but consequence. It teaches them that life does not always repeat itself for those who waste what is given, and in some cases your absence teaches them something even more profound. It teaches them to meet themselves without your reflection. That lesson can be painful, but it is necessary, because some people have built their identity by living through others. They do not know how to exist in solitude. They do not know how to examine their motives. They do not know how to witness their own patterns. They do not know how to sit with discomfort without demanding someone else soothe it. They do not know how to love without consuming. They do not know how to receive without entitlement. Then you leave, and the silence begins to instruct them. At first they resist. They tell themselves you will return as always. They tell themselves this is temporary. They tell themselves you are being dramatic. They tell themselves you will soften because you have always softened. They tell themselves their usual tactics will work. They tell themselves time will erase your boundary. But time does not always erase what truth has made clear. As the days pass, they begin to notice the absence in ordinary places, the message that never comes, the call that no longer rings, the habit that no longer has a partner, the problem that no longer has your patience to lean on, the success they cannot celebrate with you, the pain they cannot unload onto you, the decision they now must make alone, the evening that feels empty because your light is not there, the morning that feels strange because your care is missing. And when that happens, many of them become reflective. They ask themselves questions they once avoided. They remember moments they once dismissed. They replay conversations they once trivialized. They begin to understand that love is not proven by intensity in the moment, but by consistency over time. They begin to see that you were never asking for perfection. You were asking for sincerity. They begin to realize that your standards were not demands. They were invitations to honesty. They begin to understand that the very thing they called too much was often the very thing they lacked. And what is the outcome of this realization? For some, repentance. For others, grief. For others, obsession. For others, growth. For others, silence. For others, a desperate attempt to turn back time. But time does not turn back. That is one of the deepest tragedies and greatest mercies of life. You cannot return to the exact innocence of the moment before truth was known. Once someone has shown you who they are through neglect, disloyalty, or indifference, you can no longer unknow it. Once you have seen how little your suffering mattered to someone, you can no longer unsee it. Once you have felt how peaceful it is to be free from what drained you, you can no longer call the prisoner home. This is why your absence is not only their lesson, it is also your liberation. Because the moment you stop being available to people who did not cherish your availability, you recover a piece of yourself. The moment you stop answering every call for people who only call in crisis, you reclaim your time. The moment you stop over-explaining your boundaries, you reclaim your dignity. The moment you stop volunteering your soul to empty hands, you reclaim your life. The moment you stop begging to be understood by those committed to misunderstanding you, you reclaim your peace. And peace is not small. Peace is revolutionary. Peace is the quiet evidence that you have stopped living according to other people's confusion. Peace is the return of your energy to your own center. Peace is the ability to sleep without emotional warfare in your chest. Peace is the freedom to wake up without anticipating disappointment. Peace is the relief of no longer managing the moods of those who never managed yours. Peace is the spaciousness that appears when you no longer carry what was never yours to carry. So let them feel the weight of your absence. Let them meet the consequences of their own carelessness. Let them sit with the silence they created. Let them remember the times you tried. Let them feel the echo of the care they refused to protect. Let them discover that the love they ignored was more sacred than they understood. Because sometimes people do not deserve your presence in the form they demanded it. Sometimes they only deserve the lesson your absence brings, and if that lesson changes them, then your leaving has become its own form of grace. But whether they change or not, your task is not to remain a prisoner of their awakening. Your task is to become whole in your own life. Do not wait for the apology that may never come. Do not wait for the recognition that may arrive too late. Do not wait for the gratitude that may remain imprisoned in pride. Do not wait for someone else to discover your worth before you do. Do not wait for the world to validate what your spirit has already known. You were enough while they overlooked you. You were valuable while they underestimated you. You were significant while they reduced you. You were worthy while they withheld their care. Your worth was never created by their recognition. Their recognition only arrived when your absence made denial impossible. And there is great power in that. Because when you know your worth without needing external applause, you are no longer easily manipulated by the fear of being misunderstood. You no longer settle to stay visible. You no longer contort yourself to remain wanted. You no longer audition for a place in hearts that should have opened naturally. You no longer betray yourself just to maintain access to people who would not have survived their own lessons without you. At that point, you become dangerous in the most beautiful way. You become free. And free people are impossible to enslave with crumbs. Free people are impossible to seduce with half-love. Free people are impossible to trap with nostalgia. Free people are impossible to break with silence. Free people are impossible to control through guilt. Free people are impossible to use because they have learned the cost of self-abandonment. That is the final gift your absence can give you. It can return you to yourself. And when you return to yourself, you understand that your life was never meant to be a waiting room for someone else's realization. It was meant to be a living temple of meaning, dignity, and wholeness. You were never born to be consumed by the blind spots of others. You were born to become conscious. You were born to grow into your own depth. You were born to discover that what leaves may hurt, but what remains is often more real. So walk forward. Walk forward even if they look back too late. Walk forward even if they call your distance cruel. Walk forward even if they only learn after losing you. Walk forward even if your absence awakens them, but does not bring you back to the same place. Walk forward because your soul deserves environments where it is not discovered only in absence. Walk forward because love that is real does not wait for loss to become visible. Walk forward because you are not a lesson designed for someone else's convenience. Walk forward because your life is larger than their regret. Walk forward because your destiny is deeper than their delay. And if they were changed forever by your absence, let that be true. If they finally awakened after you were gone, let that be true. If your silence forced them to face themselves, let that be true. But let it also be true that you are not returning to a place where you had to disappear in order to be missed. Let it also be true that you are done confusing affection with dependency. Let it also be true that you are done confusing attention with love. Let it also be true that you are done confusing regret with growth. Let it also be true that you are done mistaking being needed for being valued. Let it also be true that you are done shrinking for the comfort of people who never expanded for your soul, because your absence changed them. But your awakening will change you, and that change is sacred. That change is the end of self-betrayal. That change is the beginning of truth. That change is the restoration of dignity. That change is the moment you stop asking to be understood by those committed to their own blindness. That change is the moment you become impossible to diminish. Ladies and gentlemen, the deepest wounds in life often become the most precise teachers. The people who never expected your absence to change them forever are the same people who never understood that your presence was a gift, and gifts, when ignored, are eventually withdrawn by life itself. That is not cruelty. That is order. That is not revenge. That is wisdom. That is not bitterness. That is the law of consciousness. What is not valued is lost, and what is lost often becomes visible only in its absence. So let your absence teach. Let your silence clarify. Let your boundaries heal. Let your departure purify. Let your life reclaim its rightful center. And never again confuse the inability of others to recognize your worth with a deficiency in your worth itself. You were never the problem. You were the mirror. You were the lesson. You were the light. And when they lost you, they did not lose just a person. They lost a whole language of care they may never fully speak again. But you are still here, becoming wiser, becoming stronger, becoming clearer, becoming free. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how absence changes everyone forever.